I'm Rod Hartzell. I'm here in Southern Illinois on the Dale Beasley and Sons Farm and Feedlot. I'm here with Jeff Beasley. Jeff, we'd like you to tell us a little bit about your operation here.
We're a diversified beef operation. By that I mean we pretty well cover all segments of production, from cow-calf, registered and commercial. We do bull and heifer development. We run stocker cattle, background, and finish as well. And work here in conjunction with my father, Dale. The Beasley family has operated on this farm since 1918.
Jeff, these calves behind us here look like pretty green calves. Assuming you're just starting them on feed, tell us a little about them. I'm sure it's a challenge.
These calves are very green. They've only been here 5 days. Very high-risk calves. Bought through a sale barn. Most of them bought as singles. They came in here Wednesday night, worked them 2 days later. 85% of them were bulls. We castrate immediately. These cattle are going to ultimately end up in a feedlot in Iowa. I'm feeding them for a client of mine. So they're only going to be here 45 to 60 days. So our goal is to get them processed immediately, get them on feed immediately to try to minimize any potential health problems we might have.
From a mixed 30 standpoint, how do you use that in this particular ration, and how has it helped you keep these calves healthy and get them started on feed?
We've seen mixed 30 help us in several ways. We're feeding byproducts here that are very dusty, so mixed 30 helps us as a feed conditioner. It's also very palatable, so cattle are drawn to the bunk because of the mixed 30. Mixed 30 helps us bind the ration together with our mineral supplementations, but it is giving us a big boost in protein and energy right off the bat. Historically, a lot of people say it takes a while to get calves started on feed, and the first 30 days, just try to maintain them. Don't even worry about getting the calves to gain. We've proven here that with our feeding program that we can get calves started immediately and we can get them gaining immediately. As evidenced by these calves, when the feed wagon came over this morning, they were at the bunk.
This ration is a combination of what ingredients and how much mixed 30?
It's fiber-based, so we're using a lot of soy hulls in here. We're grinding some hay and putting in there as our roughage source, and then mixed 30 as well. Mixed 30 makes up 25% of this diet. It's a diet that we're running about 15% protein on. Our net energy for gain is running about 53, so we're getting good protein and energy, and it's a very palatable ration. Once we get them straightened out here over the first few days, they're also going to be kicked out where they can have access to some grass. We'll continue to feed them as well, but our goal is to get them to gain a pound and a half. On these high-risk calves, we've been able to keep death loss to a minimum, and I'm talking 1%, maybe a shade over that. That's 1,500 calves like this just over the last year. Our pull rate has also been in the single digits. I think the key is the health program we have and the feeding program we have. And as I said, mixed 30 plays a big part.
When these cattle go out on grass, you're still feeding them this ration. Do you offer mixed 30 free choice in that particular situation?
We do,
along with
we
the
do,
ration?
because we just think it's added insurance to boost their nutritional profile and therefore, again, to minimize health problems.
What do you typically expect them to eat in that situation from a free choice standpoint?
I anticipate, somewhere between 3/10 and 5/10 of a pound of mixed 30 per day. Now we've had calves like this all through the winter when we didn't have grass, and I would say those calves probably ate half a pound a day, maybe 6/10 at the most.
Let's jump to your cow operation. Out here in Southern Illinois, it's predominantly fescue, and it's fescue that's infested with the endophyte fungus. What kind of issues do you see as far as reproduction on those cows that you're running on that particular type of grass?
Before we started on mixed 30, we were having big problems with the fescue endophyte. By that I mean we would see cows with long hair coats, standing around panting, breathing hard all the time. We've even seen some extreme cases where cows lost their hooves. The endophyte problem was so bad. When we introduced mixed 30, I would say within 6 months' time, we saw a reduction in the impact of the fescue endophyte to the point that right now I don't think we have a problem with it at all.
You leave the mixed 30 out pretty much year-round?
We feel like even if the cow will consume just a little bit of mixed 30, it's going to aid us in breed back. We went from having a third of the cows open the previous fall to having over 90% bred the next fall after we'd been on mixed 30 for 1 year. And it's the same cows, same bulls, same pasture. The only change was we had introduced Mix 30 as part of our program. And at that point, we were convinced that Mix 30 had a huge impact on that.
The fescue in this part of the country is predominantly tall fescue, and it is infected with an endophyte fungus. When an animal consumes that fescue, that fungus gets into its system. The animal system will react to that, and one of the first things that it does as a reaction or as a defense against that fungus that is getting into its system is to have an inflammatory effect. Most of the research that's been done on that type of thing, where they've fed a fat like is in Mix 30, they've found that that fat affects hormones that have anti-inflammatory effects, where before that inflammation is causing the blood vessels of the animal to constrict, where you come in with a product that has an anti-inflammatory effect, the blood vessels open back up, the animal cools down and goes about and does what she's supposed to be doing, gaining, reproducing. So you basically eliminate the problem. Where you have been feeding it year after year after year, you set that animal up so she's already predisposed to that anti-inflammatory effect so that she doesn't show the issues and she goes about and does what she's supposed to do. You're feeding a very high level of Mix 30 in this starter ration. 25% is a very high level. So you're getting a very good level of fat in the diet. And obviously fat's very important as an energy, and it's a very good form of energy, especially if you're on a fiber diet. But the other big thing that we've seen with the type of fat that's in Mix 30, and Mix 30 is it's a corn-based fat. Corn-based fat is very high in what they call linoleic fatty acid. Roughly 50% of the fatty acid profile of corn fat is linoleic fatty acid. And there's been a lot of research that's shown that linoleic acid can have a very positive effect on the immune system of an animal. Linoleic acid, when it gets into the rumen of an animal and is broken down, it actually becomes a precursor for certain hormones, and there are hormones that play a major role in immune function. And I think what you're seeing here with Mix 30 and the success you're having with a lot less health issues has a lot to do with the fact that you're feeding a very high level of linoleic fatty acid. And I think that's the reason these animals are performing, a large reason why the animals are performing the way they are. I guess, Jeff, what I'd like to do now is go take a look at your paddocks where your stocker cattle are at.
Sure, sounds great.
Jeff, these calves behind us have already been through the 45-day starting period. Once they get here, what is the protocol? What kind of environment are they in, and what's the protocol for feeding them now?
These cattle or calves are similar to what we saw in the starter pen earlier, except these calves are 45 days ahead of them. These cattle were started there as well. After 3 or 4 or 5 days, they were kicked out here on where they had some grass in these traps. We're still feeding these cattle every day, and they still have access to Mix 30.
So is the ration that they're on, is it the same as when you first start them out?
It is identical. I don't switch anything on the starting or growing cattle. These calves actually are going to be shipped out later this week, going to a feedlot in northwest Iowa. And the feedback we are getting is they're just really pleased with the cattle. They have no health problems. The cattle know how to eat. They've been gaining, and they've just been tickled to death with the results they've been getting here. Therefore, they continue to send cattle in here for us to background for them. Another positive aspect of this type of ration is you can feed the cattle quite a bit of it, and they don't get too fat too early. And so we grow the cattle, we stretch the cattle, we're putting on muscle and mass, but we're not putting on fat at an early age. Feed yards that have received our cattle have been real pleased with the condition of the cattle as well as the health, and when the cattle hit their finishing yards, they take off. They've been real pleased with them.
So how long have you been feeding these calves in this situation, and how long have you been using the Mix 30 product?
We were introduced to Mix 30 in 1992. We had some friends of ours in western Kentucky that were backgrounding cattle. They had started using Mix 30. They recommended it to us. We felt like there was definitely room for improvement in our backgrounding operation at the time. We started incorporating Mix 30 into that and have been using it ever since. So I guess we're getting close to 20 years. I've changed some ingredients over those years, but the one ingredient that's never changed was Mix 30. We've used that consistently since that time. We think they go on feed and stay on feed better. Therefore, we have less mortality, less morbidity. We've got the cattle gaining, We've got them in the right flesh condition. That's one reason we have never diverted from using Mix 30 since we started on it, because it just brings so many positive aspects to this type of an operation. As I've told a lot of people earlier, Mix 30 is the one ingredient that I would not do without.
Jeff, this group of cattle behind us looks like cows and maybe some first calf heifers. You've just brought them in off grass. What are your plans for them here now?
Well, these cows have come in. We've started a synchronization program with them. Started last week. They'll be bred later this week.
These cows, I assume while they were out on grass through the winter and this spring, you've had them on Mix 30?
They have access to Mix 30 365 days a year. We do extensive AI breeding, especially with our registered cows. You know, they have access to the proper feed at all times of the year, but especially right before breeding, we try to get them on an upward plane of nutrition. Something else we've done over the last several years, we typically do a lot of heifer development. We have done extremely well above the industry average. And I would say that we've probably gotten close to 75% of first calf heifers that conceive with one-time AI service. So we think a solid nutritional program has been very key for us in having the success we have had in getting cows bred.
In a situation like this where you're doing a lot of AI you've got the cattle running on end-of-fight infected fescue, I think it's very important that you do have a product like Mix 30 available to feed to them and help with that program.
You know, we've been using Mix 30 for nearly 20 years. Within the first 2 years, we saw immediate major impact in improving our breedback rates. Just think that Mix 30 is such a key to that, it's one thing that we just would not consider doing without.